Welcome to episode 2 of Beyond the Crease, a Grassroots Cricket original podcast. I'm Behram Kazi, and with me, once again, I have the former general manager of the Jamaica Talawas, Mr. Ali Khan, who is also a fellow cricket aficionado. Ali, how are you doing today?
I'm good, Baram. How are you?
Great. And once again, thank you for making it to the podcast. And our topic for today is quite an interesting one. We'll be talking about the benefits of Pakistani players not being able to participate in the IPL. Now, as we all know, the Indian Premier League is arguably the greatest franchise T20 competition in the world, not just because of the cash influx, but also because it has its own dedicated window in the cricket calendar. It attracts the best cricketing talent from across the globe, and it is also the only franchise T20 league in the world in which Indian players are allowed to participate. So, Ali, at the face of it, it seems like Pakistan cricketers are actually losing out on a lot over there.
I think Pakistani cricketers are losing out. First of all, they're losing out on making a lot of money. That's number one, right? Because a cricketer has only a short period of time that they're professionals, and so in that time they need to make as much money as possible. So after their career, they're secure, right? And we've seen Pakistani players play in the IPL. In fact, some of the best moments in IPL history have Pakistanis in them, right? When Shoaib Akhtar makes his debut for KKR and does extremely well. Omar Gul did really well for KKR. The Rajasthan Royals team that won the first IPL had, I believe, three Pakistani players. I believe Kamar Akmal was on that team, Suhail Tanveer, and also Yunus Khan.
Yep.
You can do whatever you want to, in terms of the history, but Pakistani players are obviously a big part of the IPL early on. So obviously they're missing out on making more money, which is obviously a pity for them personally. In terms of playing with other players, apart from the Indian players and maybe some Australian players, and generally speaking, the PSL has a lot of really good talent as well. So yeah, I mean, I think they miss out on the environment of the IPL. They miss out on playing with and against Indian players. They also miss playing with some top international players. So yeah, those are all factors. But I think we have county cricket now, and I think one of the things that we hadn't seen for a long time was a lot of Pakistanis playing county cricket, and the fact that our players were able to go out there and the market dictated that they're going to be available during this window has been good for them. I think it's been good for county cricket as well. So yes, I mean where you lose something, there's certainly trade-offs. I think Pakistan cricket is also gaining something as well.
Yeah, fair point. And you did roll back the clock to that very first IPL in which Pakistani players did participate. And of course, Sohail Tanveer won the purple cap, which is something I guess no Rajasthan Royals fan would ever forget either. Of
Mm.
course, the late Shane Warne was captaining them in that tournament. But yeah, I think you bring up a very valid point over there that Pakistani players do have some opportunity cost over here, that since they are available in this window in which the rest of the world is effectively playing the IPL, they get to participate in the county championship. And after a long time, we're seeing such strong representation from Pakistan in the county championship, maybe perhaps after the early 2000s. And it's really nice to see. And I'd also like to bring up, Ali, over here, that I feel like the proliferation of T20 cricket across the globe is actually hurting the game. And Pakistani players are actually benefiting in that regard, that whilst the whole world is earning a lot of money. And yes, of course, that is valid. Pakistani players are missing out on that money. But at the same time, they're gaining experience in red ball cricket, which I feel is priceless going into this year, especially with the World Test Championship. Still, Pakistan hanging in the balance over there somewhere. If they do manage to win all of their tests, I feel like they will have somewhat of a shot at making that final.
Yeah, no doubt. I think there's again there are obviously trade-offs, right? There are things that we're losing, but there are also things that we're gaining. One of the things that we're gaining is rest. One of
Mhm.
the things, if you look at the international schedule, the domestic schedule plus franchise T20 cricket, players are playing around the clock, and there's a mental, apart from a physical fatigue of actually playing the game, there's a mental fatigue, right? So having this legitimate break during this period can be good, right? I think it's good for cricketers. It's healthy. Secondly, when in the past, when Pakistani players have gone to county cricket, the vast majority of those players have been bowlers, right? Even in the 2000s, right? Some of the bowlers that would go over there, guys that maybe we didn't really talk about too much, guys like Rauf Takhar, for example. I believe he went and played for Surrey. Those are the type of guys who were getting action there. And now what we're seeing is Shan Masood, obviously, Rizwan, Babar, Azhar Ali. we're seeing batsmen get opportunities to play in county cricket, which is really good, right? This is something that we haven't seen. Obviously, Sean is leading the Division Two in runs, 3 centuries, 350s, and he's been a big boon. I believe today, I don't know if this news is true, but I believe he's been made the T20 captain for Derbyshire, which is an interesting development. So I
Yes,
think
that is. I can confirm that that is in fact true.
right. So all those things are really good for Pakistani players and Pakistan cricket. And when we talk about county cricket, we can't just talk about the red ball format, right? As you said, like red ball is important, Test cricket is important, but they're also going to be playing the one day format. They're going to be playing the T20 format, like Shan Masood. I think when we look at various series, we forget that players are playing in multiple formats in a series, right? So the best thing about county cricket is far better structured than the other domestic leagues around the world. So the players really have a consistency in the amount of cricket that they're playing, as opposed to domestic cricket in Pakistan, right, where they might go on international duty or they might, never really get a consistent run of games to really improve themselves. We're really missing out on like this player developmental aspect because the cricket schedule is what it is. But when these players go and get to play county cricket, I think they also develop their game. They have some time to work with coaches outside the cauldron of actually competing, to work on various things, which probably they don't in our domestic format, or just the way cricket is structured in Pakistan and around the world. So as I said, there's like tons of benefits and maybe some negatives as well, but I think the benefits outweigh the negatives. So anyone who thinks that Pakistan cricket should bend over backwards and participate in the IPL, I don't think that's the case. I don't think they need to do that.
Yep, that is a strong statement. And another benefit, of course, of playing county cricket, you mentioned how the structure is really good. They get to play all formats. It's also in English conditions. So I think that is a big plus, because even if Pakistani players were playing the IPL, they would be playing it in Indian conditions, which aren't too dissimilar from the conditions that they get to play in the first place. So getting to play in England for an extended period of time, and then also, these are young cricketers. It's a great step towards maturing as a cricketer, playing with foreign players in England and kind of understanding their structure and the way things go around in the county championship. I think that's very beneficial. You mentioned burnout. It's a big thing in today's cricket. You even see it in India. Since they are playing the IPL, they often rest players for different series, and they only pick their best 11s for the very big
Mm.
series, for instance, versus England or Australia. But in other series, India chop and change.
Right.
Pakistan consistently picks the same set of players for pretty much all series. Resting is not really a concept in Pakistan cricket. And of late, you can see that Pakistan cricket's calendar has gotten quite busy as well. They play consistent cricket across the year, multiple formats, and across the globe as well. And especially, I want to stress on this burnout factor, because ever since the pandemic has hit,
Right.
teams have to isolate, have to quarantine, and they have to go on tour practically 2 weeks earlier than they would have back in the
Mm.
day. So that adds to the fatigue, and players are definitely, their fitness is impacted, their mental health is
Right.
impacted.
Yeah.
And I think that getting this period off, of course, there are a bunch of Pakistani players that are playing in the county championship, but everyone else is getting a rest. And I think that is very, very important for them to just keep sane and for their bodies to get some rest and get rejuvenated, because Pakistan's cricket calendar is just about to start yet again in June when they face the West Indies.
Yeah, you said something really important there. You talked about when you're talking about burnout. When Pakistan beat India in the T20 World Cup in Dubai, the first thing that Ravi Shastri talked about was how Indian players are burned out, right? Because they had gone on this long tour to England for a test series. We remember the whole controversy of Indian players leaving England one test early so they could play IPL. That was their biggest excuse, right? That our players were burned out, which is one of the reasons why we weren't in the right frame of mind to play Pakistan, and which is why Pakistan beat us. And so, the idea that there needs to be more, I generally believe that there needs to be more structure around the international schedule. There needs to be more structure around domestic schedule. And these are things that the Pakistan Cricket Board and cricket boards can generally control. They can't completely control it, but they can generally control it, and they can also control roster management, right? And you just said right now that Pakistanis generally don't rest players. That there is kind of this consistency in the squad, which is a good thing. But we've also seen too many times someone like a Shaheen Shah Afridi playing meaningless game against Zimbabwe, playing a meaningless dead rubber after a three-match test series. We've seen that too much as well, right? And if you look at what's happening in England right now, guys like Saqib Mahmood, I think Joe Archer, I think a few others have had stress fractures, right? And that's something we've seen on bowlers, right? We've seen that happen to Shoaib Akhtar, other Pakistani bowlers. I think Mohammad Zaid as well had stress fractures. There's no way to actually prevent that. I don't know it from a medical perspective. We should probably have somebody on to discuss that. But what you can do is you can do some management of players, right? Where they're not playing meaningless games, or maybe they're not playing a swath of the domestic schedule, for example. And I just want to share one baseball parallel. So baseball is probably, amongst all the major sports around the world, baseball is probably the most in tune with both data analytics and also sports science, right? They're at the forefront. And so they've been managing pitchers, for example, the equivalent of bowlers in baseball, for a very, very long time. So much so that there was a time when it was very common for a pitcher to pitch 9 innings. Now it's almost impossible. It was very rare that a pitcher pitches 9 innings. And despite the fact that pitchers are pitching less than ever before, they're being developed that way as well. There's more Tommy John surgeries, right, which is a shoulder injury that has become very, very common amongst pitchers. So I don't know the science of injuries. I will say that there is a limited amount of deliveries that a bowler can bowl in a year, both at the highest level when you talk about bowling in matches, and but also in terms of bowling in the nets, practicing and things like that. So we have to be very careful on that front. So for example, we just had PSL, we had the Australia tour, we had Shaheen, Hassan, all these guys bowling a lot of overs, specifically Shaheen. Now he's in England and he's bowling there as well. So where there are good things, there's also your concern, specifically about someone like Shaheen, who he's come a long way. He's probably one of the best bowlers in the world now. His health is really important. So how many games he plays, he doesn't play, is really important. So, he's someone, for example, not to belabor the point, that maybe he shouldn't play in the West Indies series. I don't know.
Yeah, that's an interesting take. We all do want to wrap Shaheen Shah Afridi in cotton wool, but then also I'd argue that Pakistan doesn't have a lot of ODIs left till the ODI World Cup in 2023. So might as well have the first string team play as much as they can together as a unit. But anyway, coming back to the topic,
I agree with that. We
sorry.
need to be more thoughtful about this subject. That's the point, right? The idea isn't that you're just randomly dropping players, randomly resting players, but there has to be some thought behind what games players play, what games they don't play. Obviously, there's not a lot of Test cricket, so you want to make sure that they're playing Test cricket. But there's so many meaningless T20s, meaningless games that these guys are playing that maybe they shouldn't be.
Yeah, I do agree. And then the IPL, unlike other franchise tournaments which last for a few weeks, the IPL lasts for 2 months. It does seem like overkill at some point. And if a franchise is paying you huge sums of money, and let's, for instance, hypothesize that Shaheen Shah Afridi does play the IPL for the Mumbai Indians, let's say, and gets a huge paycheck, then he will play every game and he will try to give his level best, which could in effect adversely impact his fitness. Of course, it could also not, because Shaheen has played consistent cricket and, knock on wood, has not been injured thus far and has not experienced a stress fracture. But then, if he was playing in the IPL, that's 2 months of rigorous cricket. And then
Mm.
once you're back from that, you've got the international cricket calendar. And he does get picked for Pakistan pretty much every single game. Like you said, there have been a bunch of meaningless T20 internationals that Shaheen Shah Afridi has played, like the ones against Zimbabwe. So, you've seen it with other players as well. We've seen how AB de Villiers, he spent so much of his energy in the IPL that it forced an early retirement. So perhaps, Pakistani players, they could have longer careers too, because since they
Mm.
don't
Why not?
exact so much energy in 2 months of the year and kind of have it spread across pretty much all other 10 months of the year playing for their national team, I feel like they'll probably end up with more games for Pakistan and have extended careers.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's really a balancing act, right? That needs to come from the board and needs to come from the team management. One of the things that people, I think, missed recently in the news was West Indies announced their squad, I think, for Pakistan, also for their domestic tournament that's happening. And a lot of their main players, guys like Evan Lewis, didn't pass the fitness test, right? Now, why is that happening? Well, there could be many reasons, right? Like the fitness test can be very stringent, but I think one of the main reasons is that franchise T20 cricket does not demand high level fitness, right? I worked with the Jamaica Talawas, and I played with players like Chris Gale. I didn't play with them. I worked with them, players like Chris Gale, Andre Russell, Darren Sammy. So these are the three big examples. And Chris, Andre, and Darren, have all played in domestic T20 cricket now for many, many years, injured. They're not fully fit, right? They're not fully fit players. They have injuries that require surgeries, I believe, but they never got those surgeries. Why? Because they kept making a lot of money, right? There's no incentive for them. They're not losing any money playing hurt, right? So they can play, they can play hurt, they can play with half fitness, and there's no repercussion for it, right? And then when obviously when at the international level you put stringent fitness kind of regulations for players, they don't meet them, right? So that's one of the negative things that franchise cricket has brought is that you don't need to be, really super fit to play franchise T20 cricket, right? You can be, and it's not about your fat percentage or things like that. It's just simple things like just being injured, right? You're not getting treatment for your injury because there's no need to. There's no repercussions for it. So that's one of the big negatives. And I think the IPL and a lot of the franchise T20 tournaments have kind of encouraged, the environment for that to be the case, which is, generally not good for cricket. So where you see Evan Lewis, who's a really top player playing the IPL, you don't see him play for West Indies. So that's really unfortunate. I also think that there's another side to that, and one side to that is that maybe the fitness kind of rules around West Indies cricket, for example, might be very selective, and they may not be consistent. Right? We've seen this in Pakistan cricket as well in the past, where we've had a new person comes in and they want to have really stringent fitness policy, but there's no infrastructure, there's no ecosystem, there's no environment for players to come, to meet that, right? And there's a lot of selectivity. You see one guy who's, from the naked eye doesn't seem fit and he's in the team, and another guy, he's out of the team, right? So, you can use it almost as a weapon. So I bring that up because, again, the proliferation of T20 tournaments mean more cricket, less time for someone to take care of their body.
Yeah, and that's fantastic insight from a fitness perspective, especially because you have worked with the Jamaica Talawas and you worked with such legends of the T20 game, such as Chris Gale, Darren Sammy, and what was the last one?
Andre Russell. So Andre Russell's had like a lot of, Andre Russell's what, in my opinion, he's a true all rounder, right? He's a guy who
Mm.
can roll close to 90 miles an hour, at least at his peak. And he's probably one of the most dangerous, if not the most dangerous batsman in T20 cricket, right? So obviously the batting is always going to be there for the most part until he loses his hand-eye coordination. But a lot of times he's getting paid, for example, as being this kind of super all rounder, but then he can't bowl. He can't bowl because there's issues with his ankles and other parts of his body. And he's someone, again, these guys work really, really hard in the gym. But again, I think you mentioned this earlier as well. They're getting paid a lot of money, right? So when they're injured, they're going to keep playing. I mean, I'll give you an anecdote. When I was with the Jamaica Talawas, after the first 3 or 4 games, we had an issue where Andre Russell was injured. And there was this talk that we wanted Andre to continue to play as a batsman, until the end of the tournament because we want to protect our investment, we want to win. But the decision was made with me, Andre, and the medical staff that Andre was going to rest, that Andre was going to go back to Jamaica and he's going to rehabilitate so he can play all the games in Jamaica. And we sacrificed. We sacrificed 2 games. We didn't lose those games actually, but we sacrificed those 2 games. He went to Jamaica. He got himself right, and he was awesome for us for the rest of the tournament. So having fully fit players, and fully fit players means not being injured. And the second part of that is being fit, right? Your body is right to play at the highest level. So these things obviously matter a lot, but because of the proliferation of cricket and kind of no management system, we're seeing a lot of injuries now and poor fitness.
Yes, I mean, of course, you did speak to that fitness angle, but also we've seen a bunch of international cricketers, because of the IPL contracts, they've tended to prioritize the IPL over their international commitments, especially during COVID, because you have to leave international tours earlier in order to go quarantine for the IPL. And we've seen this a fair bit now. And I think it wasn't as prominent other than the West Indian players till COVID hit. Now you see players from all countries kind of prioritizing the IPL just because, it's a big pay break for them during the year. And I think that too, Pakistan cricketers, even though I do feel that they would still prioritize international cricket over any sort of domestic or franchise tournament, since cricket is so huge in Pakistan, but it's still, I feel like they are protected from that in any way because, for instance, a player could, in theory, choose IPL over international cricket, but now they just don't have that option at all, and they
Right.
know that their big paycheck is coming from international cricket. And then they do have the liberty to go and play other franchise tournaments like the CPL. I think it's a very important one because West Indies is a powerhouse in T20 cricket. So any experience gained over there is very, very useful. And then you've also got competitions like the 100 coming up. So it's not like Pakistani players do not have avenues to play
Mm.
T20 cricket or franchise T20 cricket across the globe. It's just that they miss out on the IPL. Yes, their bank balances will always be lower than any top IPL player, but then they've also got a lot to gain in terms of playing for their country, being match fit, and basically not spending all of their time and energy on 2 months of the year where they just focus on the IPL, which seems to be the sort of template now for all top international cricketers. They're waiting for that big break. When will they land that contract? And that's just an experience that Pakistani players are alien to.
Yeah, I think you bring up a lot of good points. So one of the things is we've seen this, right? We've seen what could happen, right? So this it's not like Pakistani players are more patriotic than players from the West Indies. That's not the case, right? This is kind of a human condition, if you will. We saw this in the 2000s when some Pakistani players were not treated well. What happened? Mohammad Yusuf, in the prime of his career, went and played the ICL. Imran Nazir, you can talk about whether he should be in the team or not, but he went and played ICL. Imran Farad, Rana Naved at that time was one of Pakistan's better pacemen. 2005, 2006, he was going on all the important tours. Boom! Next thing you know, he's playing in the ICL.
Abdul Razak also
Abdul Razak,
jumped ship.
maybe not at his bowling peak, but certainly at his batting peak, goes and he plays. Dropped from T20 cricket, didn't play in the T20 World Cup, but goes and plays in the ICL, right? So, and obviously we know what the politics are around selection in Pakistan. Obviously, things seem to be a lot better now than they were then. But players we've seen players recently get disillusioned, come to America. Saad Ali, Hamad Azam, others. So that is going to be there. So there seems to be Pakistani players not being allowed to play in the IPL is actually protecting Pakistan from that situation, right? From more of a drain, which we've seen in the past. So that's number one. And then the second part of it is the PCB has control over the players, right? At the end of the day, playing for Pakistan, playing the PSL is their bread and butter. It's their guarantee to making money. And the Pakistan Cricket Board has controlled that. I disagree with some of the logic around the complete control over the players. But generally speaking, that will always ensure that Pakistan comes first, which is a good thing. And then the last aspect of this is the PCB, though, does need to understand that cricket is moving in a direction. We're seeing New Zealand bend over backwards for the IPL. Cricket South Africa bend over backwards for the IPL. Cricket West Indies is there. We saw England literally give away one of their tests in the summer so Indian players can go and play in the IPL. All the English players, Moeen Ali and the likes, were getting on private jets to go to the IPL. So the world is bending backwards for the IPL, and we know why that is, and it all makes sense. And so the PCB, I think, is in a situation where they need to understand where world cricket is going. We are going towards more of a club format. I think traditionalists like myself, like yourself, maybe don't agree with that and think that there should be more of a balance. And so we need to get in front of that. As a cricketing nation, we need to get in front of that. Our domestic structure needs to be better. Our PSL, which is a great product, needs to get better. And our international calendar needs to get better. So I think for people like us, we like the balance. We just saw when Australia came to Pakistan, people came to watch test matches, they came to watch the one days. People still love all the different formats in cricket. And I think the biggest thing that administrators need to guard against, which they don't, right? What administrators do is they think about growth in the moment. They want to make as much money as they possibly can in the moment. But what they forget is people are going to get tired of T20 at some point, right? And what? We're going to have T10. Then people are going to get tired of T10. Then we're going to have T5. Then what? Are we just going to have super overs like in our backyards? I mean, what is the limit, right? That is why the three formats, or even T10, is important that we have some kind of balance between the three formats, whereby T20 still remains an amazing product. Same with one day cricket. Same with Test cricket. And I think the PCB has an opportunity to take the lead on these things because, I think the PCB has still kept a bit of a balance on these subjects where some of the other boards have not.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I too am a bit of a traditionalist. There's nothing I enjoy more than day five of a test match, which could go either way. All three results are possible. I think that's the greatest sight in cricket. And to your point, I feel like, T20 cricket in general, it's also limiting players' skills. You won't see a lot of many gritty players making it to the top anymore. You have your Chiteshwar Pujaras or Fawad Alams, but generally stroke makers are now preferred just because, attacking cricket and aggressive cricket is preferred and is the need of the hour in T20 cricket. So traditionalists, who want to spend time on the crease and bat the entire day, they aren't making a lot of money anymore. And I think that is the threat that T20 cricket poses to cricket at large. But also, I just want to kind of switch it up a little bit now. We've talked about everything that Pakistani players have to gain by not playing the IPL. Of course, they also have a lot to lose as well. There's a big paycheck over there that they're never going to receive, and they're never going to reach those heights in terms of commercial success that they would had they played the IPL. And they, of course, miss out on the opportunity to get to play with some of the best players in the world, particularly Indian players. But if we flip that, isn't the IPL missing out on the same? Pakistan's T20 roster, it features some of the best players in the world, specifically T20 cricket. And is the IPL really the best league in the world if it does not have a Babar Azam or a Mohammad Rizwan or a Shaheen Shah Afridi? I think they suffer just as much because it also adds to the mystery element. So now, if India face Pakistan in a one off match in a tournament, Pakistan can really surprise them because they haven't really played these players ever. Shaheen Shah Afridi had never played against India prior to that group game in the T20 World Cup, because in the 2019 Cricket World Cup, the 50 over World Cup, Hassan Ali played in ahead of Shaheen Shah Afridi. So he was completely alien to them. They had no clue on how to face him, and he definitely exploited that. And Pakistan ultimately, I feel, would not have won so easily had Shaheen not created those early breakthroughs. So I
Mm.
feel like the IPL at large is also missing out, not having Pakistan's top talent because it is some of the best in the world. And then also, specifically, India, I feel, is missing out, not being able to read Pakistan's players and study them in a closed environment, because when someone is your teammate, you learn a lot about their game, their strengths, their weaknesses, you watch them in the nets. These are things that Indian players can't do anymore because they don't really ever get to share a net session with a Pakistan player. What would you say about that?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. So I think Indian cricket or the IPL misses out on. They can say that it's like saying, the World Series, right? Like the baseball World Series. Is it really a World Series? I don't know, right? You can have that criticism, right? So you can't say the IPL has the best players in the world when it doesn't, right? It's called the likes of Babar Azam, Rizwan, Shaheen Shah Afridi. If you take it back 20, 30 years when Pakistan arguably at that time probably had the best T20 cricketers when T20 cricket didn't exist, the likes of Saeed Anwar, Shahid Afridi at its peak, Wasim Akram, Waqar, Shoaib Akhtar, Saklan Mushtaq. These guys would all, be, first picks, second picks, third picks in the IPL, right? So you can't make that claim when the likes of those guys are not in there. But I think what BCCI is trying to do is the BCCI is trying to create this kind of culture, this infrastructure where there is more league cricket, because when there's league cricket, there's not a lot of criticism, right? The BCCI gets no criticism for RCB losing or the Delhi Capitals losing. The focus for 3 months out of the year, 4 months out of the year is on these franchises, and the Indian fan at large probably doesn't really care who wins. While when India loses, it becomes a huge deal. Right now, India is a great team. India over the last couple of years, probably in all three formats, are probably the most consistent, probably the best team. The fact that they played Pakistan less is probably the reason it doesn't matter to them, right? So they play Pakistan once every 2 years, and for the most part, they've been winning those games until this last one. So when they lose those games, I don't think it bothers them as much because it's just one game, right? They can put it down to burnout, they can put it down to anything. But I agree with you. I mean, obviously, if those guys played, if Shaheen Shah and these the likes of him played against more Indians in the IPL, obviously, I mean, they would get the opportunity to play a high quality T20 bowler, which they don't now. So that's, I guess, part and parcel of it. But I think for the most part, there's no incentive for the IPL or Indian cricket to kind of change their stance on Pakistani players. And I think Pakistani players and the PCB have done a great job in that they haven't really talked about it. They don't really care. And they've found alternatives. And the biggest thing that they've found is I was in Pakistan for the PSL. The stadium, Lahore was packed. The atmosphere in Lahore was unbelievable. And I think the one thing that the Pakistani players were missing was playing in that super competitive environment in front of millions of people on TV, in front of packed grounds. That is no longer an issue. The PSL has kind of done that for them. And I think credit goes to the PCB for making that an extremely successful tournament.
Yes, I do happen to agree over there. The PSL's stature has really risen year after year. And I think this particular PSL, the first one that was successfully held in Pakistan for its entirety, I think it's done wonders for Pakistan cricket. And going forward, I feel like this will be that watershed moment, that turning point where Pakistan cricket really takes off, or at least I hope so.
One thing, Bahram, I would really love for people to go back, watch the India-Pakistan game from Dubai. Let's not look too much into one game, obviously. It's one game. Pakistan played well, India didn't play well, they lost. But if you look at the way Babar was carrying himself, if you look at the way Rizwan was carrying himself, Shaheen was carrying himself, those players, the way that they came onto the field that day was far different from how players in the past from Pakistan came onto the field against India, at least during this last 10-15 year period where India has dominated Pakistan, right? And so I think a lot of that has to do with the PSL, right? The fact that all of Pakistan's top players are captains of their PSL franchises, the fact that they have to do all this media stuff for PCB and their PSL franchises. It's really brought out their personalities. It's really brought out their leadership qualities. And so now when they play against India, they're not afraid of them. Where in the past they were. I think the watershed moment was 2007 when Misbah did the scoop thing, and that's not the reason that they lost that game, but that I think that was the beginning of when you could see India is now dominating Pakistan cricket. That they were, in Urdu, what you would call it, their Havi over Pakistan. That is a sense that you had. I think that shifted in Dubai that night, though.
Yeah, I feel so as well. I mean, it definitely did not feel like Pakistan's players were overwhelmed by the occasion. It felt like they were ready for it and, they were just up for the challenge. And that's something that we haven't seen in Pakistan teams of the past. They would often get overawed and the nerves really gave in. And ultimately, those big games, especially India Pakistan games, are a battle of nerves. Whoever handles their nerves better ultimately ends up on the winning side. And I felt like this was the first time that Pakistan really was up for that challenge.
Just one thing on that, and I don't want to belabor it, but like the one thing on that, we don't view the players right now in the Pakistan team as being, world class, right? Obviously, Babar we put in that category, Rizwan, Shaheen Shah, but we don't even those guys. We don't compare them with the likes of Wasim, Waqar, Shoaib, and that era of player, right? Because those guys were brilliant, right? And their legacy speaks for itself. But if you look back at those games with those great players when they played against India, those guys were really tough. They were, they were great, but you could see them press. You can see them maybe not get nervous, but overcompensate. And so the thing, those teams that were better than their Indian counterparts lost to India, and that this team, who's probably not as good as those teams, beat India. I think it says something. It says something about a bit of a cultural shift within Pakistan. Specifically in how we're playing cricket and how we're thinking about cricket, and specifically, some of the leadership development that's happened, right? That's a huge thing. And I think one of the things that people will look back at when they think about Wasim Khan's era as the PCB CEO is that leadership development through social media, through digital content, specifically through PSL and domestic cricket, and these guys becoming captains of their respective teams. How much that influenced some of the improvements that Pakistan cricket is not the best team in the world, but we are seeing an improvement, and we should recognize that.
You spoke about the culture change, and I kind of want to link that to the IPL. Of course, Pakistan players, they do come from humble backgrounds. They don't have a lot of resources at their disposal whilst making that run towards the Pakistan team, all of that hard work that they put in. And you feel like maybe, being exposed to that amount of money and the glitz and glamour of the IPL, it could potentially derail a few of those players, and maybe their concentration levels are impacted and the direction of their careers, it might be like derailed. But I mean, this is just a thought, of course, because every player is a professional and it depends from person to person. But really, not being exposed to that glitz and glamour of the IPL, because they do treat it like one giant party, and behind the scenes, beyond the cricket, there's a lot that goes on in the IPL. Not having that exposure, do you think that makes Pakistan players more committed to the sport and has their focus really in line with achieving great things for their country?
I think there's an element of that. I've been obviously, in a couple of these T20 tournaments, and I've seen some Pakistani players behind the scenes doing things that maybe I wouldn't do. But for the most part, a lot of the Pakistani guys are really good guys. And although they come from humble backgrounds, I think that we shouldn't. This is just my opinion. I could be completely wrong. I don't think we should create the dichotomy between someone who comes from a well-off background, meaning he now is educated enough to make good decisions, versus someone who doesn't come from a doesn't come from kind of a wealthy background or upper middle class background, and now that person is less likely to make good decisions. The biggest stigma around Pakistan cricket over the last decade was the spot fixing controversy, and the person that was front and center on that was someone who came from an educated background, right, from a good family. And we've seen this over and over again in Pakistan, right? So coming from a humble background doesn't make you more likely to do something wrong. That's what I would say about that. But I do agree with you. Obviously, there is a culture around the IPL. There's a culture around these T20 leagues that may not jive maybe with the culture that is pervasive around Pakistan, where there's generally people are a little bit more conservative. And obviously, we see this all the time, right? You live in Canada, I live in the States. When people come from Pakistan over to this country where everything is, where there's a lot of freedom, then sometimes they're not able to handle it.
In India, you've got Bollywood, you've got all of that culture mixed with their own culture, as opposed to maybe some place like the Caribbean where, they can just participate, but they can't really truly integrate into that culture. And I feel like they are protected from that as well. From a skills perspective, Ali, because Pakistan's players have a lot of resources at their helm in terms of the NCA and then also these conditioning camps that keep going on. Of course, there's a lot of cross cultural cricket going on as well in terms of franchise cricket. They go and play in the CPL, they go and play in the Bangladesh Premier League and the 100 now. So, do you think that they are maybe at some point missing out on some skills development, not playing in the IPL? Because it seems like they've got pretty much all bases covered, especially given how much time is put into specific skills training and match situational awareness and practice in the Pakistan camp.
Yeah, I think they could be right. I mean, obviously, if you're someone who's innovative, if you're a really good coach, if you're somebody who is at the forefront of development in cricket, it's likely that an IPL team will come and find you because obviously they have the investment, they have the money to kind of go out and get that person. And so you might miss on that. But I think, when I look at the way PSL franchises are run, I generally think that there are a lot of smart people in Pakistan. These players, as you said, they go out, they play all over the world. I think a good example of this is Mohammad Haris. If you look at the way Mohammad Haris played in PSL this year, he's not someone who's actually gone and played in BPL or some of the other leagues around the world. He's only played domestic cricket, right? That's it. But if you look at the way that he played, he seemed to play in a way that these other players are playing like. And I know he's talked about the 360 cricket and things like that. And so there's been a knowledge sharing, right? There's, players have played in the PSL or players have gone outside Pakistan and played, and they brought that knowledge back. And that knowledge is being spread and shared across Pakistan cricket. And you're seeing that manifest itself in players like Muhammad Aris, the young guys that are coming through. So again, I think good things are happening, and I don't think that we're missing out as the PSL continues to mature. We're gonna feel like Pakistani players are missing out less and less. And I think one of the great triumphs of the PCB has been, again, I'll say this over again, the development of the PSL, right? Because there was this real attempt to isolate Pakistan. That's just a fact. It's been said. There's actually quotes
Hmm.
on record saying that we want to isolate Pakistan cricket. Pakistan cricket has obviously gone past that, right? There's a resilience within Pakistan and Pakistan cricket that has helped Pakistan get to a place where we exist and we can't be ignored.
And really, what this has done for Pakistan cricket is that resilience that you speak of. It's become a part of the identity of this cricket team. You think about Pakistan losing cricket in 2009 when the Sri Lankan team was attacked, and then playing Test cricket all of those years in empty stadiums in the UAE and getting to that number one position. Misbah's team, I think that was an epitome of exactly what you just spoke about. And similarly, Pakistan has done some big things. They won the Champions Trophy in 2017 and also won the T20 World Cup in 2009 right after the attack. So, you can take cricket out of Pakistan, but you can't take Pakistan out of cricket. And I think that has definitely become an identity in Pakistan cricket. So, yeah, I agree with you. And also, I think that ultimately, I too am convinced that even though Pakistan players, they miss out on an awful lot not playing the IPL. Of course, if Mohammad Haris was playing with Joss Butler for the Rajasthan Royals, maybe he could improve his skill set. It's very much likely. But for all we know, maybe someday Mohammad Haris gets a chance to play with Joss Butler in the 100 for the Lancashire team. So it's very much likely that these players do get the same kind of exposure, but even in a more controlled environment where they can solely focus on their cricket. And we've spoken about a lot of things in today's podcast. And I think it would be safe to say that maybe even ever so slightly, I think the benefits of Pakistani players not playing in the IPL would ultimately outweigh the loss of not playing in the IPL.
Right. I think the two really good examples, and I think we mentioned earlier that Sean Masood is going to be captaining Derbyshire. That's a huge thing, right? That's a huge thing. It shows the growth in Sean, both as a player now as a leader. Sean was the captain of Multan not so long ago. And since fell by the wayside, obviously came back, had a huge PSL this year. He's having a good county season. He's the captain there. And someone like Rizwan, right? Rizwan's a great player. And think about it. You don't want Pakistani players to play in the IPL, but now Rizwan is playing with Pujara at Sussex,
Hmm.
right? So it's like, it's just, I guess, the way the world works, right? I think there's a lot of good things that are happening in Pakistan cricket. Some good people working within the system, players that I really love, and I know this is not about it, but Hasibullah Khan, who's playing for Balochistan. Balochistan this year won the domestic, I believe, the one day tournament. Is that correct? The
Yep.
domestic one day tournament. That's a huge thing, right? I think maybe we should do a podcast on that.
For sure. Yeah, Asibullah Khan was one of the stars for Balochistan in that tournament. Of course, they were led by Yasir Shah, who also has a point to prove and wants to make a comeback in the team. And you spoke about, just one final thought, you spoke about the county cricket exposure that these players are getting and how Shan Masood now has that privilege to captain Derbyshire. I feel like our players, now that they're going in the county circuit, after a long hiatus, they're actually leaders over there. Their peers in those teams look up to them as
Hmm.
elite international players. Maybe compare that to going to the IPL. Maybe the experience would be slightly different, but over here, they are the main men in their team. And I think
Right,
that
right.
also does a world of good for them, just, in maturing as cricketers and human beings and kind of taking that ownership and responsibility of performing on the field and not just, trying to do well, but okay, I'm a senior player and I have to take that responsibility to make my team win. And I feel like that leadership will ultimately do a world of good for Pakistan's players when they do come back into the international setup.
Yeah, I think that's a great point that you made, right? So like guys like Shan Masood, Azhar Ali, Ridwan, Shaheen Shah, Haris, those guys are not marginal players for their team. They're like really important players for their team. These same guys went and played IPL. Maybe they wouldn't be. Maybe they wouldn't be as important for their teams, right? We've seen, for example, some of the West Indies players, right? Some of their roles that are consistent with the West Indies players in the IPL is that they'll come down in the lower order and they'll be asked to be hitters, right? Which is a skill that they're very good at. But when then they play international cricket and we see West Indies play international T20, we'll see them collapse. Why? Because when they go and play IPL for 3 months, very few of their batsmen are batting in the opening position. Very few of their batsmen are batting at three. Very few of their batsmen are batting at four. Positions that are very, very important in building a huge total, right? They're not able to do that because all their best batsmen are playing at 6, 7, 8, 9, who come in, they bat 10 balls, and that's it, right? And that doesn't work in building a team. And so the fact that Pakistani players are playing in county cricket, but are also playing in very, very important positions, right? They have big responsibilities there, rather than just coming in and finishing a game and going berserk for 20 deliveries. I think it bodes well for Pakistan. I think I can see a world where more and more Pakistani players will be going in the summer to play county cricket, than even now, specifically because there's so many good talented players coming through.
And also because, English cricket and Pakistan cricket, there's a lot of exchange now in terms of cricketing talent. You see these partnerships coming up with Yorkshire and Lahore Qalandars. And there's a lot of this exchange going on between players and they're developing relationships. And of course, England and Pakistan have quite a long history as well, a celebrated history in which a lot of Pakistani players have played in England. And now you kind of see that tide turning in Pakistan's favor a lot with this current lot. And of course, we can only hope for good things. But I guess we've spoken about a multitude of different points being raised and arguments being made of how Pakistani players actually benefit from not playing the IPL. Of course, you guys can let us know whether you agree or disagree in the comments. Thank you so much for taking out the time, Ali. It's always a pleasure talking cricket with you.
Thank you.
All right, folks, if you enjoyed this episode, like it, share it with your friends, and of course, don't forget to give us feedback. We'll be back with episode 3 of Beyond the Crease soon. That's all for now. Goodbye.
शॉट और कैच आउट हो गए